at a minimum, is bad judgment. And for people who want to look further, they can find two-party collusion there if they want to. I think that the problem with Watergate at this moment, as government leaders are asking us to turn away from it, is that the solutions are so radical that they're too difficult for politicians. They may be too difficult for the people, they may not be too difficult for the people, but I think politicians give every appearance of turning away from radical solutions. And I think that's part of the problem. I think that we need a little bit more time to tell whether it's poor judgment or bad motivation. This past week I noticed a poll taken in California. It was written up in Evans and Novak that showed that that people in California don't feel that that the president has turned a corner on Watergate. They're very bitter over it. At the same time, the Democrats are not making any headway or any political gains out of Watergate. They are not coming up stronger in the polls than they had earlier. It may be that when the Democrats see they're not making any gains at all by being silent, that they'll change, but I don't know. Yes?
You mentioned the IT&T scandal of 1972. I was wondering if the Post came up with any correlation between that scandal and the Watergate monies.
No, we don't know of a money link between the two. Goodness knows they got enough money from every place else. However, there have been investigations which have been reported on break-ins at the homes and offices of a number of Chilean officials in New York and Washington. It's only in an investigative stage even now, and it's a low-level investigative priority, linking possibly the Cuban Americans that were involved, and Hunt and Liddy to break-ins there. It looked for a while like the three scandals, the Ellsberg, Watergate, and ITT, would totally merge into one, but that hasn't quite happened yet. Yes?
Contend that, including some senators, I believe, that by allowing this Watergate to continue in the media, that it's jeopardizing the people's right of ever having a possibility of having a fair trial. How much weight do you give to this, and what is your opinion on that?
The question of free press and fair trial is not an easy one to answer. There have been in every community very highly publicized trials or highly publicized crimes. I personally feel that it's most unusual for any publicity to prejudice a jury. I think a jury can be found. I think that some other things may cause difficulty in the Watergate trials. For example, the president's tapes. If the tapes are not relinquished, there seems to be a terrible problem for a man like John Dean or others who may have had conversations with the president, and you would think that he would demand that information. I personally discredit the problem of a free press interfering with prejudicial pretrial publicity. I think a jury can be found. I think people are smart enough to overcome publicity. Once they meet and are sequestered, I think that anybody can get a fair trial. But I would say that I feel that way on all issues of this kind. I think it's an overblown argument. Yes?
Senator Inouye was recently quoted, I think, something to the effect that the reason the Democrats weren't involved in campaign irregularities or something was because they didn't have the money. And I was wondering if you knew of any instances in the past that even remotely compared to this in past elections, either by Democrats or Republicans.
How much money do they have? $55 million or 58? It's incredible. The only things that have been written about are the kind of Dick Tuck behavior in 1964 against Goldwater. Goldwater says that he thinks he was wiretapped. There have been some small things, but the Watergate offense, see, the trouble with Watergate is people keep going back to it as a bugging, but it was a total offense. The money, the extortion, the campaign contribution that was given by Robert Vesco of $200,000 was sought twice. An aide to Maurice Stans flew to Vesco in England and asked for money from Vesco, who was facing an inquiry by the SEC. Vesco didn't respond immediately. He had given a large sum of money in 1968, and he went to the government to ask for help when he knew he was in trouble. And people said, "Who are you?" They didn't know him. So he wasn't in a hurry to give this time around, especially because he was in trouble. Then he was solicited a second time. Now that is striking behavior. In California, the chief fundraiser was Leonard Firestone. Firestone went to Lockheed, the beneficiary of a tremendous government loan, and said that he wanted $100,000 from officials at Lockheed. Now that's, you may look at that as ordinary business. But some people feel that it's not ordinary business. It was done on a scale that nobody has ever heard of. I spoke to one man who had worked with Johnson and asked him what bothered him the most about this. And he said that when he was in the White House, he really didn't know too much about campaign dirty tricks. But he knew that the money was never equivalent to the money that came up this time around. When Johnson got a campaign contribution, and Johnson was no piker, of $400,000, they would have a party in the White House. But $400,000 is nothing in this campaign. Anybody else? Yes.
You mentioned that one of the ways the Post seemingly broke the story was that they successfully found honest people that were disturbed by the events of Watergate. I'd like to know how one adequately distinguishes between honest people that the source supposedly reported and the honest, true Davis that Jack Anderson reported.
Well, we never went with the word of one source. We always confirmed our stories elsewhere. While I believe, and I'll modify that a little bit, I'm not going to say that everybody who spoke to us was perfectly honest. Sometimes we felt we were being set up by people. But we didn't have to make a judgment whether these people were being honest. When we would get information, such as information that John Mitchell controlled a fund that was used for spying and sabotage, we were lucky enough to be able to go to people close to the investigation and confirm it. Now those people, you see, there's a problem over what a leak is. A leak traditionally is when somebody in government comes to a newspaper reporter and tells him something that he hopes will get in the paper. That's not what happened in the beginning of this investigation. People didn't come to us and drop things on us. But a number of people did confirm things for us. When we asked them yes or no, they said, yeah, I guess that's right, when we had the questions and the answers ourselves. The judgment that a lot of these people were honest is a judgment I make in hindsight. And looking back at them, I'm pretty sure that the ones we spoke to were honest. They knew a little piece. They weren't the conspirators themselves. They knew a little bit of what was going on. They saw some evidence. It's those little pieces in the puzzle. Yes?
Do you have any reporters investigating the United Airlines crash in Chicago, which killed Mrs.
We
Howard
did
Hunt? And possible administrative connections in lieu of the allegations made by Mr. Skolnick in Chicago?
Yes, we did a major story on that. We'll probably be sued by Mr. Skolnick. We had one of our best reporters spend several weeks, at least, on that plane crash. And so far as we're concerned, it'll just have to go down as a mystery. We got, after the article, we ran 2 articles on it inconclusive. We found no finding of any purposeful crash there. And after the article appeared, one pilot called the reporter and said that it's the most brilliant article he's ever seen on an explanation of an airplane crash, but it didn't tell us anything about whether it was intentional or not. Yes?
Will it ever be possible to know the full extent of the Watergate?
Well, you know, we have a pretty good idea of what was going on. I'm sure there are some details we won't know. I don't know how close you followed the Senate hearings, but towards the end, in one memo that I believe, well, I think it was a memo from Haldeman, but I'm not sure, there was a paragraph number 5, a mysterious paragraph number 5 that even the Senate committee doesn't want made public. It was so horrendous. But I think we have a very good idea of the abuse of government, the abuse of the Justice Department, almost total. The demand for loyalty on the part of high government officials, such as those in the CIA, honorable men who wouldn't do the kind of things they did under normal circumstances. And I think we've got a pretty clear picture of the kind of excesses and abuses of government that took place all up and down the line. Does that mean we found out every incident? I don't know. Yes?
Why did it take a burglary to break all of this?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Why did it take a burglary to break this, if
Isn't
the
that astounding?
extent of the scandal was so immense?
In February 1972, I guess that's 5 months before the bugging, Common Cause, the citizens' lobby, was complaining about the secrecy of campaign contributions. At that time, it was thought that $10 million had been raised anonymously, and they wanted that money to become publicly known. The only thing that bordered on scandal at that time that I can remember was the milk contributions from 3 milk co-ops of something like $300,000. Now, eventually, I'm sure more would have become known about campaign contributions. But I think we're horrified by what happened, and people weren't expecting this kind of scandal. The reason more papers didn't investigate, and didn't investigate thoroughly, is they had an election to cover, and they had all their reporters covering the election. And this, of course, was the story of the election. I don't know that it ever would have come out otherwise. Yes?
Has the Washington Post or any of its reporters ever gotten any flack from government agencies or officials about its coverage or investigation of the Watergate issue?
Yes, a number of things happened. Some of them you'll remember when I mention them. Washington Post reporters who ordinarily would have been called to press conferences didn't get called around the time of the election. The 2 of the television licenses owned by the Washington Post Company are even now being challenged in Florida. And you may remember that around December, Dorothy McCardle, a lovely white-haired woman, reporter for the Post, was barred from covering White House social events. I think that was in the papers all over, which seemed to be a transparent statement by the White House saying that we wouldn't do that to them unless they were really, really rotten. There have been a number of other things. There was enormous pressure for a while. Most of it pressure we felt ourselves, because after the election, we didn't get any stories for a good while. They were hard to come by. And our readers began to write us mail saying, where are your Watergate stories now? Wasn't this really just an election campaign? It was, for about 5-6 weeks, it was a very trying period. One more question.
Am I hearing you say that, I don't know whether I have a paraphrase or whether this is an accurate representation of what you said, but that basically good people who wouldn't do these things under normal circumstances were somehow or other coerced or pressured or whatever term you wish to apply to that?
Richard Helms, who was director of the CIA, said in May this year that it hasn't been a crime until recently to do a favor for a president. Now, the CIA was coerced for a period of 5 days, from June 23rd to June 28th. At first, Vernon Walters told Patrick Gray not to investigate in Mexico. He said it'll be dangerous for the CIA. Then, on June 26th or thereabouts, John Dean went to Vernon Walters and said, look, how about going bail for these arrested men? And maybe the CIA can find a way to make payments to them secretly. At that point, Vernon Walters and the CIA bailed out. They would no longer take part in anything, and Walters told Gray, about 9 days after that he could investigate as thoroughly as he wanted to. Yet Walters and Helms, who realized that they were obstructing justice, didn't say anything until the following May, when the CIA's assistance in the Ellsberg psychiatrists' break-in was made public. At that point, Walters released his memos about the initial cover-up, and that's when Helms made a statement about it not being a crime in the past to do a favor for a president. What I'm saying is that a number of men were in similar positions. They're honorable men, well-known public leaders, who either found themselves in the middle or else wanted to do as little as they could, but were coerced by their feelings of loyalty for the administration, and you might say for the nation's leadership. That is what I'm saying. Would you like, do you want to ask more?
What hope do you see for us really having what could ideally perhaps be considered a true government?
Well, that's one reason I think it ought to be done in the open. I think it ought to be cleaned up. I think it was wrong to aid and wrong not to speak up about having given aid. I think, on the other hand, that some agencies have shown themselves very well. I mentioned the FBI. I think Patrick Gray made a terrible blunder. He did a dumb thing when he destroyed those files. However, on examining everything very closely, at least as closely as I can, I think Patrick Gray ran a fierce investigation, and the White House considered him a menace. And he was as honest a man as anybody will ever find. I think the trouble, I think you find good and bad here. I think the FBI did a very fine job, but it was blocked by higher-ups in the Justice Department at the request of the White House. My hope is that the Watergate crimes will be revealed publicly and continue to be revealed publicly in a public forum, not in a court, so that politicians in the future will be afraid for these things to happen. I think, for example, if I haven't mentioned any salutary effects of Watergate. I think that in 1974 and 1976, there won't be the kind of money in politics that there was in 1972. Large campaign contributions are obviously in disrepute. Many of them were secret, many were just plain extortion. People will be afraid to give in secret because it may be discovered, and also because the laws are more stringent. I think the taking of money out of politics to a large degree is a sure thing, and I think it's owed directly to Watergate, and it's a salutary effect. I think there are others. I think Congress has asserted itself to some degree on some issues. Senator Fulbright said in May, for example, after the House voted to block funds for bombing in Southeast Asia, that vote was a direct attribute of Watergate. Now, whether that will continue is another question. But he said that they got their courage up. There'll be a reordering of their relationship with the presidency because of Watergate.
Well, we thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
We're off to a good start. You're invited for the remainder of the week. Now let's go get something to eat.